from Florida.
The first thing I'd like to do is correct what my colleague from Pennsylvania said. With regard to pre-existing condition, I was here last year. I brought to the floor a bill that would say it didn't matter what the Supreme Court did. We would make sure we kept pre-existing condition if the Supreme Court declared that the Affordable Health Care Act was not constitutional. The Democrats blocked it. I've been up here 2 years, and I've never seen once my Republican colleagues want to reduce spending for Medicaid. What I do think is unfair is in my state of Florida, what we receive from the federal government is significantly less per person than what a state like New York has. So I would like changes to the Medicaid program. I like it to be a fair program that states like Florida get treated as well as states like New York. Madam President, I rise today to discuss an insane issue in the Democrats' COVID spending bill that we need to fix. Tucked into the Democrats' bill is a provision to give $1,400 stimulus checks to inmates. That's right. As our nation faces a public health crisis and a crippling debt crisis, Democrats are handing out stimulus checks from your tax dollars to state and federal inmates who don't pay income taxes, have all their needs, food and medical expenses included, paid for by taxpayers. And they do nothing to stimulate the economy. It simply doesn't make sense. My friends and colleagues, Senators Bill Cassidy, Tom Cotton, and Ted Cruz, tried to fix this by introducing an amendment to strip this out of the Democrats' bill, but the Democrats wouldn't have it. Senate Democrats voted unanimously to block the passage of that good amendment and chose instead to waste even more taxpayer dollars by sending $1,400 checks to inmates. Let's talk about what that means for American taxpayers. There are nearly 1.5 million state and federal inmates incarcerated in prisons across the United States. These are people convicted of committing serious crimes and victimizing their fellow Americans. Under the bill the Democrats passed, American taxpayers are on the hook for $1,400 checks to some of the most heinous criminals we've ever seen. I'm talking about people like the racist Charleston church shooter Dylan Roof, serial rapist and predator Larry Nassar, aspiring terrorist Mohammed Daklala, who tried to join ISIS and is now in prison in Georgia, convicted serial killer and rapist Mark Goudou, who's on death row in Arizona, convicted cop killer Michael Addison, who's on death row in New Hampshire, and the monster who killed 17 innocent Floridians in Parkland at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School on February 14th, 2018. How can anyone possibly justify sending checks to these people? If we send $1,400 checks to all state and federal inmates, all 1.5 million, that's more than $2 billion. $2 billion in taxpayer money going to stimulus checks for inmates. That's $2 billion that could be used to help our small businesses recover. $2 billion that could be used to enhance vaccine development and distribution so more Americans can get the shots they need to move us forward and away from this virus. $2 billion that could be used to help pay down some of our massive debt. There are so many positive uses for these funds that provide a real return for American taxpayers. But sending it to inmates isn't one of them. It's an unjustifiable expense that does nothing to fight COVID-19. Today, I ask for full support of this body to strip this bad policy from law. We cannot forget that America is in a debt crisis. I've been talking about it for a while, and I won't stop talking about it because it's a crisis my Democrat colleagues still don't seem to understand. Right now, our nation is headed towards $30 trillion in debt. Think about that, $30 trillion. And U.S. debt will be equal to nearly $240,000 per taxpayer. That's insane. And what are the Democrats doing to rein in this unsustainable debt? Absolutely nothing. In fact, the Democrats' wasteful and untargeted spending bill, which will raise the debt from $28 trillion to $30 trillion, contains loads of handouts and provisions, just like this one, that recklessly spend on the priorities unrelated to COVID. That's why I sent a letter to the Biden administration on Monday, urging him to rescind hundreds of billions of waste from this bill and create the targeted approach Americans truly need. It's clear that Democrats are living in a fantasy land where debt doesn't matter, spending has no consequences, and inflation is impossible. Of course, reasonable Americans know that's not true. The Biden administration needs to take immediate action to request the rescission of the non-COVID related, liberal agenda-driven, and wasteful funding found throughout this bill. So, I'll keep fighting to cut down on this liberal wish list. Today, we can start that important work and pass my bill to not only save $2 billion from going to inmates who have no need for the money, but also show the American people that Congress is committed to remaining fully accountable to the American people for the proper stewardship of tax dollars. Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of Senate 798, introduced early today. I further ask that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection? The senior senator from Oregon.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, today the Republicans are showing some real chutzpah. On this issue, Republicans were for it before they were against it. Today, they claim to want to target prisoners. The real harm they are doing is to innocent children and families. I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President,
The junior senator from Florida.
it's hard to imagine why my colleague just rose in opposition to this good bill. Let's be clear. By objecting to this bill, Democrats are standing in full support of spending $2 billion to send $1,400 checks to inmates. Democrats want to spend $2 billion in taxpayer money to send checks to people in prison convicted of committing serious crimes and victimizing their fellow Americans. That means Democrats are saying that they want American taxpayers to be on the hook for $1,400 checks to some of the most heinous criminals we've ever seen. People like Dylan Roof and the Parkland shooter. How can anyone justify sending checks to these people? Let's remember, inmates, they don't pay income taxes, they have all their needs, food, medical expenses included, paid for by taxpayers. They don't do anything to stimulate our economy. I truly hope my colleague will reconsider his objection and stand with me in putting accountability to American taxpayers over this insane policy that does nothing but throw $2 billion we don't have out the window. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.